Hi, my name is Shelby Praj, and the policy that I will be talking about today is limiting residential segregation. So, to begin, I will be giving some background on this policy, and residential segregation is. I chose this policy because it's strongly correlated with significantly reduced levels of intergenerational upward mobility for all residents in an area. Segregation by income, particularly the isolation of low-income households, also correlates with significantly reduced levels of upward mobility. Upward mobility is another term for the American dream, which is where any individual has a chance to become successful through hard work in the U.S. Residential segregation has proved to dismantle this, as only certain people are granted the opportunity. So this all started through redlining. I mean, of course, it started on the history of slavery and then segregation, but redlining was also created once to further segregation efforts in 1934 by refusing to insure mortgages in and near African American neighborhoods. And the Federal Housing Administration was subsidizing builders who were mass producing entire subdivisions for whites, with the requirement that none of these homes be sold to African Americans. So the government's efforts were primarily designed to provide housing to white middle class families, and African Americans and other people of color were left out of new suburban communities and pushed them into urban housing projects, which severely hurt their opportunity for a good job, education, transportation, and amenities like that. The term redlining comes from the development by the New Deal by the federal government of maps of every metropolitan area in the country, shown as the one here. And these maps were color-coded by the Homeowners Loan Corporation and then the Federal Housing Administration. And these color codes indicate where it's safe to insure mortgages. And anywhere where African Americans lived was colored red. So we can see how redlining has been a proponent in how neighborhoods today are segregated and how it has led to low income households and furthered the wage gap as well. So next we will be talking about who championed this. So first, to get rid of redlining was the civil rights movement. It was kind of led by, mostly led by Martin Luther King. He was a great motivational speaker. He, after his passing, they passed that Fair Housing Act of 1968, which prohibited discrimination concerning the sale, rental, and financing of housing based on race, religion, national origin, or sex. It happened to be passed a couple days after after Martin Luther King's assassination, and proved to be one of the biggest awards of the civil rights movement. However, segregation still persists in the U.S., and government representatives like Cory Booker and Sandy Darity are working to implement policies to integrate communities. So today, I'm like a huge influential speaker on the zoning laws that are excluding families, that are very excluding, is Cory Booker. He has noticed the economic role that bad zoning laws play in our country. From the American Prospect article, Booker has noted how exclusionary zoning laws that discriminate by income spiked after the Fair Housing Act was passed, which is no coincidence as people of color suffer the most from these laws. Exclusionary zoning also feeds the affordable housing crisis, as restrictive zoning laws drive up prices by artificially restricting the supply of housing. These zoning laws are a major factor in the rise of unaffordable housing and increased segregation in our country. So what this policy is seeking to solve or improve is the quality of life of minorities and just seeking racial equality. From Kimberly's article, he mentions that residential areas are able to exclude people of color, specifically African Americans, from high-performing schools, which systematically keeps people at a low academic level and low income. This article also mentions that public policy choices and local officials steer public housing units, which are occupied by Black and brown people, into high poverty areas with fewer resources and opportunities. This can be seen in metropolitan areas such as Chicago, Detroit, Oakland, and the list goes on. Since the Fair Housing Act was passed, there has been an increase in diversity, but the problem of residential segregation still persists, as we can see from the map provided by the Washington Post. This map shows a map of Chicago, which is notably one of the most diverse cities. However, the city remains to be one of the most segregated regions in the U.S., as this area is predominantly Black, this one is white, and this is Hispanic. Yep, you don't see a lot of integration. Next, we will be talking about the income equality factor. So, residential segregation really gives certain people more opportunities than others. Taylor's article reveals that segregation by income has increased during the past 3 decades across the United States and in 27 of the nation's 30 largest major metropolitan areas. Seen in another study by Pew Research, these increases are related to the long-term rise in income inequality, which has led to a shrinkage in the share of neighborhoods across the United States that are predominantly middle class or mixed income. So we can see where someone lives affects their access to transportation, education, employment, and healthcare. With better access to these amenities and basic needs, an individual has a far greater chance of improving their education, obtaining and maintaining their job, and overall just achieving the American dream. As the wage gap is growing in America, we can understand how one's living situation plays an enormous role. So the cost or estimated future cost of this policy is so this policy is seeking to reach equality for everyone in the United States, and it was hard to find any costs for this besides how it would be costly for realtors, as they have to make housing more affordable for lower income households, and they're not able to inflate housing rates in impoverished communities as much if there was a policy to help African Americans and other minorities. It's also costly to the economy if we do not implement policies to reduce economic segregation, as our Black per capita incomes would remain low, and education attainment would also remain low in poorer communities, which affects our overall GDP. Yeah. There are many benefits of this policy. If localities prioritize affordable housing, it can help neighborhoods steer away from gentrification and towards diversity. Along with more affordable housing, people moving from poorer communities will have more opportunities as they are granted access to more things like transportation, higher education, and community programs that are very beneficial. Integrating neighborhoods would help decrease income equality and the racial gap by providing equal opportunity. So the winners in this case, I believe the winners in this case are all minorities, low-income households, and organizations seeking a smaller gap in regards to income. But really, everyone is a winner with this policy. The losers of this policy are upper-class white people that are in favor of white supremacy, along with government officials that want minorities to remain oppressed. Also, housing agencies that benefit from overcharging people who lack education, and the resources. Yeah. Next is so this policy, So this policy will affect supply and demand in the housing market. If housing becomes more affordable, there will be a higher demand for suburban areas with access to high-quality schools, because all families want a good future for their offspring and have a good quality of life. The supply for housing in nicer areas will be limited, but the more impoverished cities could offer better programs that could help uplift the city overall. With the wage rate, I predict that this policy would raise lower wages and bring high wages down, which would help decrease income inequality nationwide. So my overall analysis is, I believe that this is such a great policy because it will close the widening wage gap that we are seeing and provide equality for minorities like myself, who just want to have a successful career, not necessarily to be wealthy, but I believe that everyone should have the chance to achieve greatness, and that's what the American dream or America has been built on, and that it would just be very beneficial, not just for individuals like myself, but for everyone in general. And here are my sources.